In this video, I'll discuss expectancy theory of motivation. There are three components to motivation, and all three of these must exist in order for motivation to be high. We'll discuss this from the perspective of DUI enforcement because that's an area that's been researched from the perspective of expectancy theory. Let's first consider the individual behavior. There are a number of behaviors that are necessary for an officer to engage in DUI enforcement. There's the behavior of recognizing indicators of impaired driving. There's the behavior of conducting traffic stops, the preliminary contact with the driver, conducting standardized field sobriety test, administering preliminary breath test and evidentiary test, documenting the facts of the arrest, and finally prosecuting or testifying in the prosecution. So there are any number of behaviors associated with DUI enforcement. These behaviors must be performed to a certain level. Typically, this level of performance is defined by an organization, sometimes by the police department, or perhaps by some professional organization, as in the case of like standardized field sobriety tests. Those standards were developed by NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Some are legally defined, like the levels of performance in terms of administering preliminary breath test or evidentiary breath test. The organization, the police department, typically defines appropriate levels of performance in terms of documenting arrest. District attorney's offices and the courts typically establish levels of performance for testifying and prosecuting DUI cases. And then there's the reward. What's the reward that the officer receives for DUI enforcement? These rewards can be intrinsic, it can be self-fulfillment, it can be extrinsic in terms of letters of commendation, can be informal commendation from the
assignments, promotions, things of that nature that are extrinsically provided to the officer. The three components are the links between behavior, performance, and reward. Expectancy is the link between behavior and performance. The ability to engage in a behavior to a certain level of performance. Instrumentality is the link between performance and reward. In other words, if a certain level of performance is achieved, will the reward be received? And finally, balance, and that's the extent to which the reward is valued. Expectancy theory is a cognitive theory of motivation, and we believe that people ask themselves three questions, the first of which relates to expectancy. If I try it, can I do it? And that's the person's perception of his or her knowledge, skills, and abilities given the behaviors required for a certain type of performance. And again, this is specific self-efficacy, and we've discussed in previous classes generalized self-efficacy. There's instrumentality, which is the person's belief that a given level of performance will result in a given reward. The person asks him or herself, if I do it, will I get it? The confidence has to be strong that the given level of performance will result in the given level of reward, or the sought after level of reward. And again, typically it's the institution, the leaders, policies and laws governing a given organization that should ensure that there's a strong link between performance and reward. Then finally, there's balance. The person asks him or herself, if I get it, do I want it? Does that reward have value? And that will be highly variable from one individual to the next. Again, for the person to be highly motivated, all three of these has to exist. High levels of expectancy, high levels of instrumentality, and high levels of balance. If any of these are low or non-existent, then motivation will be low or non-existent. Just as if this were a multiplication problem of expectancy times instrumentality times balance, If any of those is low, then the product will be low. Or if any of them is zero, then the product would be zero. There are some strategies that leaders can use to deal with any of these low components. If expectancy is low, we can clarify the relationship between the given behavior and performance. That the person understands how to engage in a given behavior and understands that a given behavior is required in order to achieve a certain level of performance. If we can do so in terms of accomplishing the organization's goals, then we could lower the performance standard, but again, no lower than whatever is minimally acceptable to accomplish the organization's goals. If the person lacks the knowledge, skills, or abilities, then obviously training or education can help in that regard. Again, this is perceptual. In other words, the person's perception may not be accurate. They may possess the knowledge, skills, or abilities, but may just lack the confidence to engage them in the real world. So the leader there must build confidence on the individual's part. And we may also need to provide additional resources. If we ask ourselves, if I try it, can I do it? If we don't believe we have adequate resources, then we're more likely to say no. We can increase instrumentality, and again, that is incumbent upon leaders and members of the organization to ensure that individuals receive the rewards connected with a given level of performance. We need to make clear what the contingency is in terms of performance and reward. Finally, we can increase valence. Again, individuals are highly variable. One person values, another may not. The simplest way to determine that is to ask, what is it that a given individual seeks out of the situation? Again, as another review, expectancy is the link between individual behavior and performance outcome. The cognitive question is, if I try it, can I do it? Instrumentality is the link between performance outcome and reward outcome. The cognitive question is, if I do it, will I get it? And then finally, there's reward, balance, the extent to which the individual values the reward. And the cognitive question is, if I get it, do I want it? Motivation is a function of all three of these components: expectancy, instrumentality, and balance. If any of these is low or non-existent, then motivation will be low or non-existent.